to say I can't wait to see that all done. I love going around and seeing the Ryde Art Trail. Every time I see one of those murals, my heart just skips a beat. It's lifted the town in a way that only art can, but then I would say that. Okay, next I'm going to ask up to the podium Steve Holbrook. Steve is the independent chair of the Ryde Neighbourhood Board. Got that right? Yes, of course.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, that's okay.
Evening everybody, lovely to be here. What I thought I'd do is just take you through the time frames and what's happened with the now Neighbourhood Board to bring you up to speed from how it started, where we're up to and what we're looking at doing going forward, because it's been a process of constant change. So it started just over, a year ago with a Conservative government and their agenda and their plan, and it was great when Ryde was awarded the 20 million. At that time, it was a very fast period of engagement. The board had to be put together in very, very fast timelines because they were the timelines which were dictated to us by the government policies and guidelines at that time. One of the key things we then had to do was put together a development plan, which was a 10-year plan, looking at how that 20 million was going to be split up. The 20 million was allocated over a 10-year period. It wasn't that the 20 million was available day one. Each year there were certain drops and a plan had to be put together according to that. Key to that process was public engagement. It was community engagement. And the absolute core of the entire process was to reach out to all parts of the community, young, old, sports, arts, everything you could imagine, to get that engagement and feedback from people of Ryde to find out what the community wanted. But again, at that time, the timelines given were incredibly short because that's what the rules were at that time. So we had to move very, very quickly in order to do that. And that's where we started with engagement in the NatWest building, but also lots of outreach to get as many people across the community engaged with as possible. It wasn't an easy process, largely due to the time frames. And there was only so much we could do within that time frame, but we did reach a wide amount of people, and we had a really good demographic mix, split. There were areas where once we got the report in, you could see there was some areas are stronger than others, but overall it was a pretty good representation and feedback. The original guidelines or the original community engagement was focused around what the plan and the guidelines which were given to the board were. So we had to look at the government said, look, these are the areas you can spend your money. It wasn't that you could spend your money on everything. There was 4 topics. So when we went to the engagement with the community, it was around those 4 topics because that's were the areas where we were allowed to spend the money. We then had to put together the plan, which then had to go off to government within, again, very short timelines, which was going to say how, based on the feedback we had, what sort of projects we were going to look at, how we go about it. So for that, we engaged with a third party, which was linked to the Isle of Wight, to put together that plan. So that involved taking all the feedback from the community, going through hundreds and hundreds of questionnaires, getting the responses, putting it into clear, defined graphs and feedback so we could see what was the messages coming from the community, how did that change based on different ages, demographics, and all those different scientific data how you analyse that data. So that was the process, and then from that, different projects were put out where we were getting feedback so we could start to see what the community wanted. That plan then had to be together, I think it was by the end of August, and we were working very, very tightly to that very fast deadline. We didn't have long. Then when we were getting full speed ahead, everything was going at 100 miles an hour, looked to be great, then the election got called. From the moment the election got called, we were advised that you can carry on spending the money with these third parties, but it's up to you. We don't know if the project's going to go ahead or not. We don't know what's going to be the outcome of the election. If you wish to continue doing the plan and to the original deadline, it's up to you. You can if you want, but you don't have to. We're not advising you to. We're not advising you not to. Do what you like. So that was basically how we were left, somewhat in limbo. So at that time, we decided we'd pull right back because we didn't want to spend money when we didn't know what was going to happen. So we kind of wound it down to a reasonable conclusion. We knew we were taking the project quite a long way, but we didn't conclude it, and then we waited. We then had the election results, And within pretty much days of the election, we were told to put everything on hold. There was no decision, we just have to wait. And that took months. So basically, during that time, the board sat and waited, and waited, and waited, and waited. Then eventually, when the first budget or budgetary update came along, we were advised that yes, the plan or the money was going to be made available, but how, under what rules, we didn't know. So even though from October we started to know that, okay, something was going to happen, we didn't know what was going to happen, we didn't know how it was going to happen. So again, we were in the situation where do we push forward, do we not push forward? So at that time the board got back together and we thought, okay, well let's go back to our basics. We know something's going to happen, so how do we then start to move things forward? So we looked at how we could start to move the board forward, but again, without incurring too much cost, without over-committing, going down a rabbit's warren because we didn't know where it was going to go. So we started doing some of the basic background, getting some of the structure together, but without engaging. Again, quite frustrating because, again, we couldn't really get going. Then eventually, not very long at all ago, only a couple of months, we got the guidelines came through. So eventually the guidelines pretty much said, okay, the rough idea of what was going to happen before is still going to happen, but we now have a new set of rules, new set of guidelines. What that meant is effectively we have to take quite a few steps back in order to go forward again. The main reason for that is the areas which are now available to us are a lot wider. So before there was pretty much 4 main categories which the board could look at. Now pretty much everything's open. But within everything being open, there's still leads in different areas. One of them being NHS, for instance, which is now one of the highlighted areas, but there's a lot. So what that means is whilst we've done consultation in some areas and quite wide areas, we're now going to have to go back again and consult with the community based on more areas which are now being made available. Which again is all good, but obviously we have to now go back in order to go forward. What we don't want to do, and what we do feel is the community of Ryde is somewhat surveyed out. I think there's been more surveys in Ryde per capita than probably anywhere in the world. I mean, it's incredible. So we're trying to find a way that we can now go back to the community, ask the questions, get the feedback we need to make informed decisions, but without people just completely losing the will to live, without having to answer more surveys and thinking, well, nothing ever happens when we answer surveys, we're just surveyed out. So we're now going to look at ways to target and reach out to everybody, get the feedback on the specific areas, which will then allow us to make the informed decisions on what people want. We can then use that information to, again, start to put our plans together. Some things have moved forward in the meantime. Lisa is with us at the back of the room. So Lisa's looking after one of the projects which we came back where we thought there was a gap, which was in the business community. When we looked at the survey responses, there was some responses from the business community, but there wasn't a lot. We're also aware that the Ryde Business Forum had somewhat fallen away. So we picked up that as a project, and Lisa's heading that up. So in terms of really looking at the business engagement and then putting into place some longevity and legacy of a business group going forward, that's largely, Lisa's going to spearhead that, and that's going to feed into the board in terms of engagement, but also it will be there for a long time in the future. So that's one of the areas where we're looking at some specifics or a gap and addressing that. And that's just one area, that's a business. There'll be other areas where we look to do the same thing in specific areas. So taking a step back again, there was also a lot of procedural changes within the new guidelines. So again, we're having to go back and change our structure in terms of how we operate. That's also taking some time and will take some time, which also means in terms of going forward, we're still only going to go forward slowly whilst we put together the frameworks and the governance and the processes which allow us to move forward. One thing I will share with you, one of the views of the board going forward in terms of what we want to achieve is legacy. And it's really important that when we make decisions which will have long-term impact and will benefit Ryde from now for a very long period of time. What we don't want to do is simply spend money, the money's gone, and then the same problems occur a few years' time, because again, we haven't put in place a process which allow for long-term change and structural change. So one of the key areas we're looking at in order to do that is create a charitable body which will sit initially alongside the board. So to try to explain more, so the example would be we want the charity to be able to own assets which will be able to generate income, which will allow us to allow projects which we fund to have longevity. So an example would be if we built a toilet block because people need toilets, when there's no money, the toilet blocks will close because there's no revenue to look after toilets and clean the toilets. So one of the things we're looking at is how do we create ongoing revenue from that board. So an example, and it is an only example, if we bought an asset which we can then generate an income from, that income can then pay for the toilets once the money's run out and goes forward. So it's going to be a real mixture of how that money's spent between grants, between capital projects, between so many different areas. But and one of the key things to be doing, how can we make 20 million, 40 million, how can we leverage it to 60 million, how can we go about making a long-term change. All of those things will take time to put together, working out the best sort of structure for that charity to operate, how it would operate, takes time. But we basically the money is not going to be, the 20 million won't even be made available to April next year. So we have between now and then to put together the plans and the structures to allow us to hit the ground running. Going back a bit from that again, we have to put together effectively a 10-year plan as part of our process of what we hand over to government to approve, which will also be broken down to an initial 4-year in detail. So that 4-year plan will show kind of the projects which are what people describe as shovel ready, things we can get going, wins and things which can happen in that first 4 years, but also it'll show the pipeline the entire 10 years. In terms of where we are, in terms of commitment, there is no commitment to any project. We're right at the beginning, we're back to planning, we're back to putting the structure, we're back to consultation, we're back to getting feedback. But the overriding principles is, we want to make sure this 20 million is spent really well, and we want to make sure this 20 million has a legacy that long after that 10 years, the assets will create an income which will keep funding well beyond the original 20 million. So getting that balance, meeting the short-term, medium-term, long-term requirements of the community is what we're thinking about, and will take planning and thought. So there will be a process now where there will be, again, engagement. We'll be asking questions, but we're asking specific questions on particular areas and really focusing on particular demographics where we feel there was a gap in the initial planning or the initial consultation. But I think that just gives you a general background. So a lot of what I'm trying to put across is nothing actually happened yet in many ways. So nobody's missed out. Lots of opportunities exist, but the core principles is to make a real difference. That's what I would say. It's about creating a legacy, and it's about making fundamental changes where people will be able to look back and think, okay, that's where that 20 million's gone, that's what's happened to it, and we can see the benefits of it. And getting it right is more important than doing it quickly. And having wins where people can think, yeah, the money's been well spent, the community's benefited, and our next generations will continue to benefit. So that's our core principles and our core aims. That's about it.